Right. Let's go ahead and dive in. And as I said, we've got some folks joining us, but we'll weave them in as we go. If you have questions while we're going, please either drop them in the chat or feel free to just raise a hand, jump into the conversation. This is very conversational. We've got, the first half, we're going to roll through a couple of updates from various parts and pieces. And then we'll get into a discussion around MAHA, where I would love to have input and thoughts from those of you who are more engaged in that space as we think about how RPI, how the Soil and Climate Alliance engages with that on the pieces that really focus on regenerative agriculture. Um, so really quickly, because we've got a couple of new folks with us today. I'm Jessica Hulse-Dillon. I am the Senior Director of the Soil and Climate Alliance, which is a supply chain working group at the intersection of food and agriculture focused on how do we scale regenerative ag. And as part, within the network, we do a couple of things. We do a lot of deep learning. We do a lot of, mapping what is happening across the system, engaging with the leaders in that space. But we also really focus on identifying what is preventing us from moving more towards scale. And then we spin up initiatives to address that. So underneath our umbrella or built on our platform, whichever way works visually better for you, we also have the Soil and Climate Initiative, which is focused on that highly technical transition, verification, and certification of agricultural lands moving towards regenerative. We also have the Nutrient Density Initiative focused on how do we connect that healthier soil with more nutrient dense food with human health. And then we have our Regenerative Policy Initiative, which it supports all of our work and is built off of the fact that we see state and federal policy as a series of levers that we need to be able to control in order to support farmers, brands, the system as a whole in this transition to regenerative. Also built on the fact that I spent 20 years in DC and I'm a huge policy junkie. So this is just a space that I really oddly enjoy playing in. But you guys are also a bit odd because you like to play in that with me. So that's what brings us all together for our November policy update. There's some things happening, there's some things not happening. So I'm going to dive in to a couple of pieces um, around that with the help of some friends. So starting at the top with one of the biggest stories we are now on day 36 of the government shutdown. Speaker Johnson has said Congress will not, or at least the House will not be coming back next week. So this is going to keep going. Therefore, there can be no movement on appropriations. There can be no movement on the skinny farm bill. There can also be no movement on specific pieces of the 2023 Farm Bill CR that have to be renewed by the end of the year, or they revert to, I think it's 1934 pricing. It might be pricing from the 60s in the dairy. Donald is nodding at me, so I think I might be right there. So we really do, Congress needs to come back. Otherwise, we go over that dairy cliff. And quite frankly, nobody knows what that means. So with the shakeups coming from election results in Virginia, New Jersey, New York, Georgia, Alabama, oddly enough, Maine, there were a couple of interesting ones yesterday. There are now calls for the House to go back from some prominent Republicans, including the president. So we'll see what happens over the next few weeks. Stay tuned. While we are focused sort of on those government pieces, I want to introduce Ben. There's Ben. Ben, are you ready? There he
Yes.
is. Hey, everybody. This is Ben Knuth. If you don't already know him, he is fabulous partner in this work. He's the Ag Policy Manager at the National Wildlife Federation, and he's just going to give us some updates on what is going on at USDA in terms of funding the farmers leading this work. So, Ben, take it away, my friend.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. And you actually remembered my title better than I do. For whatever reason, I can never.
I
Look
looked it
at
up on LinkedIn yesterday, so
I should just have it pulled up. That's what
there
I
you
should do.
go.
So good to see everybody. I know a number of you, but not everyone. So just give a very quick background. So Ben Knuth, I work at NWF, National Wildlife Federation, which, excuse the spiel, but is the largest conservation organization in the United States with over 8 million members and supporters. We have 50 state affiliates and a couple territories who also have affiliate organizations. We are a true federation in the sense that, you know, national is separate from our affiliates, affiliates are separate from national, but we cooperate and work together on a lot of different stuff, which I actually think when we come together, which is often, that it means we can get more done. Also, because National Wildlife Federation, you say, Mike, what is your interest in agriculture? We work on, of course, wildlife issues, but also we care deeply about soil health, water quality, and the communities that support all of the agriculture and work that is needed to manage our wildlands. So apologies for that little spiel. I feel like I have to do it when I don't know everybody. USDA, things are not great. Things are shut down as the rest of the government. And I think shut down in a way that was surprising to me and many others on the Hill, because not only have they shut down some of the sort of, what are not deemed, needed to continue during a shutdown, but also a lot of the mandatory farm programs that typically don't need a farm bill to continue and function. So we're talking about things like ARC and PLC, which are part of the farm safety net. We're talking about conservation reserve program, which is part of the farm bill, but is a mandatory payment. And we're talking about the staff who typically are at FSA, the Farm Service Agency, to process checks and loans and all the things that are needed as farmers and ranchers and private landowners across the country are planning their management of their operations for the next year. The semi-good news is FSA last week turned on the ARC and PLC payments, but did not take the next step in turning on Conservation Reserve Program payments and other safety net payments. Jessica, you mentioned the dairy cliff. Dairy margin coverage was not turned on, which is separate from the dairy cliff, but there seems to be a lot of disagreement between the administration and dairy folks, grazers in general, referencing the Argentina situation. So things are tough right now. Harry, yes, some FSA staffers are going back to work. I was just about to mention that, in a very limited capacity, though, is my understanding. Rumors that they have a very limited list of things that they're allowed to work on, which we don't know what that means, but is kind of an odd thing to be hearing. So the good news is that yes, some are going back. The bad news is that it is still in a limited capacity. Jane.
Yeah, sorry, I'm too lazy to type my question. So is the upshot though, because I'm not familiar with some of these specific programs, is the upshot that all of these are in theory going to be paid out, but they will be delayed and it will be later than people want in order to make their plans? Or are there specific programs where, they're going to kill them while it's shut down, or have been killed while they shut down? It's just a, delay or decimate, I suppose, is the question.
I believe by and large delay, though, delay at this moment when people are doing operational planning for the next year is in a sense, decimating, particularly on the conservation front. A lot of not just conservation reserve program, but also um, environmental quality incentives program, EQIP, and conservation stewardship program, CSP. We've been hearing that a lot of folks who have been submitting contracts for approval ahead of the October 1st shutdown, you know, there's question over whether or not those will get processed correctly. If you do the work that you either were approved for or expected to get approved for, will you get reimbursed for that work? Will there be fixes to the contract that would normally happen in regular order and have no real impact on the work that's hitting the ground? You know, are those going to happen? So largely delay in terms of the ARC PLC and CRP stuff, but there are still a lot of questions on how they'll handle some of those administrative hurdles. And you know, I have to say I'm fairly pessimistic about how this administration is going to handle the conservation specific kind of hurdles, because it seems that they do not value the work that conservation programs do in the same way as the other.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Ben, can you touch on also the emergency payments that have been, I don't want to say promised, but have been floated for farmers, the 13 billion, and where that money might be standing?
Yeah, no, thank you for reminding me. So the backdrop to all this is the tariff situation and the economic struggles that farmers and ranchers are experiencing across the country due to the tariffs. In response to this challenge, the administration, Republicans, Democrats, have been trying to figure out a way to get more economic aid out to farmers. And what and really that is the reason that they paused the ARC and PLC until earlier this week, and why they've turned off CRP and some of these other programs that I've mentioned, because they don't have the money available, the liquid cash to provide the $13 billion that Jessica mentioned. So in effect, what they're doing is they're creating a 10 to $13 billion hole in USDA's budget that is going to need to get filled down the line. And so, you know, it's just they're really walking a line in terms of you know, the legislation that will be needed to make sure these mandatory payments can keep going out to farmers. It gets very wonky, but yeah, thanks for sharing that link, Jessica.
Yeah, not a problem.
But it's already a sticky situation that's only going to get stickier.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Ben. Yeah, it's ever evolving, and we're all hearing different pieces. If you ever hear an update, please feel free to share it. You can just reply all on those emails that you all get from me, which I'm sure you love and eagerly read. Just because the best way to make sure that we're protecting our farmers is for us all to be connected and moving off of, the same playbook. Ben, anything else you wanted to drop into the conversation?
Not really. I just would add, you know, I can't help myself. I would just add that in the context of the shutdown right now, it is very difficult to do this advocacy work in general. The healthcare issues, the food assistance issues, this is brinksmanship being played at like a level that you know, I'm not the oldest guy in the world, but it hasn't happened in my lifetime. And So it can feel difficult to do it. However, it is important to point out these smaller issues to offices and how the farmers and businesses and communities are being impacted in these less spotlit areas, if that makes sense, right? So I would just encourage you, if you do advocacy work, if you would like to do some, that you know, staffers on the Hill are bored right now. Frankly, they're bored. They would like to have somebody to talk to, and this is a good kind of thing to raise to them. I'm like, look, when we're talking about $13 billion, let's just do the 2 billion in CRP that's already happening, right? Let's talk about how the administration can use the levers it has already and move forward in a responsible way that farmers and ranchers are used to and like. It can be that simple. And it's better than yelling at them because they're getting a lot of that.
And they're not getting paid. So be nice to the staffers, but also tell them, tell them your stories. If you know farmers that have great stories, have them call, have them, really connect, because those are the stories that matter. So awesome. Thank you so much for that, Ben. Really appreciate it. Hope that by maybe December we can talk about something a little bit more, more to connect on. So awesome. Thanks, Paul. Also, if you feel like going and traipsing around, DC, do it. Great. Restaurants are a little emptier right now. The metro is a little emptier right now. It's a good time. Perry, just the key messages to deliver are really the fact that, you know, that if we just deliver the aid, or not, I don't even want to say the aid, but the financial support, there we go, to farmers that has been promised in these programs where there's money sitting there, that will help our farmers. We've got to keep that money flowing, especially Ben touched on this. It's November. Farmers are doing 2026 planning. We want them to be able, especially those who are in the, transitioning regenerative, transitioning organic, transitioning ROC space. They've got multi-year farm plans that they have planned out and are meticulous on. And, Stephanie Alexander's on this call. She can tell you how much work they've put in to things like that, as well as other farmers. We want them to be able to stay on their timelines and to stay on their plans as much as possible. And so many of these USDA programs, remember, are not advancements, they are reimbursements. So farmers spend the money, then they submit their receipts and get reimbursed. And if they don't get reimbursed, that's when they start, not being able to, have their kids play sports, not being able to buy groceries, potentially losing the farm. It's really, really dangerous. So we want farmers to be able to stay on their plans, stay fluid, stay moving forward. So awesome. Next, we are going to, and you heard Ben touch on it really briefly, Argentinian beef. We've heard a lot about Argentinian beef lately and the trade deals and how those are affecting farmers. Really, really appreciate Brian Riley, who's the director of the Free Trade Initiative at the National Taxpayer Union, for joining us, because this is an issue where I can talk super high level, but the details are not my forte. And luckily we have Brian to talk to us about Argentinian beef and Chinese soy and all of the other pieces that are swirling around us. So go for it, Brian.
Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me, Jessica. And I know a few of you, and nice to meet the rest of you virtually. Just a fairly brief update of what's going on in the trade world. And if you follow this at all, really a lot of it is unknown beyond what's in the headlines in terms of what the Trump administration is going to do from one day and 1 week to the next. That probably goes for a lot of things, but it certainly does for trade policy. Today, the Supreme Court had oral arguments on a challenge to the administration's IEEPA tariffs, which is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which is the authority that the Trump administration claimed allows them to impose tariffs on other countries based on a national emergency. Some were based on the emergency of fentanyl imports, most of them in the so-called reciprocal tariffs. They weren't really reciprocal, but that's another thing. The reciprocal tariffs were imposed based on the threat allegedly imposed by trade deficits. Several businesses and states brought a suit against the constitutionality and legality of this for a variety of reasons. The main one being that tariffs are taxes, and the Constitution says that Congress, not the president, has authority over taxation, and the questions about whether the Congress could delegate this power and under what circumstances they could delegate it. I had never listened to a Supreme Court argument or oral arguments before, so it was interesting for me to listen. The justices grilled both sides pretty hard, but they really grilled the Trump administration probably the hardest. So I don't even want to say that I'm cautiously optimistic, but I was happy to see that there was at least a pushback against some of the arguments that was made by the administration. At least three justices pointed out that one problem potentially with the way things currently work is that if the administration is allowed to impose tariffs under IEEPA, the only way Congress can do anything about it is by passing a resolution to terminate the tariffs and terminate the emergency, or by passing a whole new law saying we're taking away this authority. But in either case, that gets sent to the president, and the point was made, how many presidents are going to sign on to something that would limit their authority? So they said essentially, I think Judge Gorsuch said this was like a one-way ratchet that delivers power from the people's representatives to the executive branch. A couple of the justices also asked what kind of guardrails would be put on future emergencies. Does the president have authority to just say anything's emergency, or who has oversight? And if the court doesn't have oversight, then who does? Because Congress doesn't seem anxious to do anything to rein in the tariffs and retake some of their authority. So this is maybe a little more broad-based than what you're asking about, Jessica. The other things that have been going on, many in the agriculture community were concerned that until a week or so ago, China wasn't buying any of our soybeans. They were buying them from other countries, including from Argentina. And the United States had provided economic support to Argentina, which in turn had reduced some of its export taxes on soybeans, and frustration from some that why are we supporting a competitor that's selling products to China that we're not allowed to. So since then, it appears that the administration in China have reached a deal. If it lasts, that means China will start buying our soybeans again, maybe bringing it back to the levels that we've had in recent years. So that would certainly provide some relief. There's also been concern from beef producers that the Trump administration has said they're going to roughly potentially quadruple the import quota on beef from Argentina. I, to be honest, haven't had a chance to delve too deeply into it. I think, in my opinion, it's probably more symbolic than anything, because we import a lot of beef, but we don't import a lot from Argentina. But I think that the beef producers felt a little bit singled out. And this is all in a background where agriculture producers, as most of you are aware, are getting hit by tariffs that are affecting their inputs and raising the cost of doing business here, whether it's tariffs on fertilizer or herbicides or steel and aluminum that they need directly, or that go into farm implements or sheds, or you name it. So we're still getting hit by those tariffs. In the meantime, we're negotiating a variety of trade deals. And a lot of times the administration will say that we are gaining access to other countries because they're lowering their tariffs. But in most cases, we're keeping our tariffs very high, much higher than they were almost at any point since the 1930s. And most economists, any trade economists would tell you that a tax on imports is also a tax on exports. In other words, if we put a 20% tariff on, you name it, another country, Korea, we're not going to buy as much from them, and they're not going to have as much money to spend on our exports. So these are agreements that not only leave high U.S. tariffs in place, which are regressive, hurt Americans, drive up costs, not just for agriculture producers and manufacturers, but for families. But I think are also going to reduce our export opportunities and have a variety of long-term implications with respect to how other countries view us in terms of a trusted ally, trusted trading partner, even beyond official government retaliation, the ability of people in other countries just to say, well, we're not going to buy your stuff anymore. We're going to boycott you. We're not going to visit we're not going to visit Hawaii or Florida anymore, and all those kinds of things. So that is a very broad-based sort of summary of where I think we are today. The last thing I'll say is I don't know when the Supreme Court is supposed to announce its decision. I'm afraid it's not going to be for a long time. And that means there's just going to be a lot of uncertainty. And I don't know how, if you're a small business trying to decide where to source your products, or a farmer trying to decide what to plant and all those kinds of decisions, there's still probably going to be a lot of uncertainty for several months going into the future is based on everything I've read currently. So,
Right. One quick question, because you were talking about, quadrupling Argentinian beef imports. Would, would that, because the way a lot of folks have framed it is they're going to flood the market with Argentinian beef, which sadly is really good beef, or would it be a shifting of, well, we're getting more from Argentina, so we're getting less from Mexico? Do you know?
I have not
Okay.
seen those details. I don't
Okay.
think they've released those details.
Gotcha.
And I think the quantity is such that it wouldn't be flooding the market, but U.S. producers never want to have
Yeah.
have more competition. As the director of the Free Trade Initiative, the National Taxpayers Union, I would caution some in the industry against being short-sighted. We're great beef producers here in the United States, and of course agricultural producers in general. And if we want to have access to other markets, then it seems to me we should be cautious about closing our markets. So I understand if you're a beef producer, you might be concerned about more beef coming in, but I don't know if any of you have seen the price of hamburger meat at the grocery store lately. I know most of you have, and it's expensive. And the ability to trade internationally is something that's important, not just to exporters, but the families and everything as well. So I think it's a mistake to single out any one industry or entity to feel the pain. But it doesn't seem unreasonable to me to say the prices are really high here, and if Americans want to buy stuff, whether it's beef or something else that could be produced elsewhere, maybe we ought to let them do that and find other ways to help our producers find markets elsewhere.
Awesome. I just had another question. No, it's gone. So if it comes back, I'll ask it. But no,
So I am going to look into those details, and then
that would be great, Brian.
The part about does the increased quota, is it offset by a tighter quota someplace else?
Yeah.
But it was interesting to see President Trump say, "Oh, well, more imports will lower prices," which is he doesn't seem to have made that connection in the past in many cases.
Sure.
I'll just leave it at that.
Well, and it could also be really interesting, and some high level connections from yesterday's results is that cost of living is still really high, 9 months into the administration. Republican candidates weren't talking about that as much as, Democratic candidates who won yesterday. So maybe there'll be more, more of a focus on that going forward and actually lowering the prices and not just not lowering the prices, because eggs are getting out of control too, man.
Yeah.
$6 a dozen for grocery store eggs.
I saw related to the elections, I saw a fascinating piece to me anyway, that was the question was posed, what happens to Republicans when Democrats are the party of tax cuts? And it's mainly Democrats leading
Yeah.
the opposition to these regressive tariffs, and Republicans who, with maybe one exception, are either supporting them or not saying much about them. And I'm an economist, I'm not a political guy, but I think if you're a political person and you look at what happened yesterday, the point of the report that I just had read said, well, Republicans are going to have to work on their messaging. And I thought, it's not the messaging that's the problem. So, but Jessica, I hope in a few days to have an update on some of those numbers that you're asking about. So I'll share
That would be
when I
amazing.
do if you want to pass them around, because
Yeah, that would be fantastic, Brian. And I will share those with the group. Amazing. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate your perspective on that and how we move this all forward. So a couple
Jessica, I would just like
jump
to
in, Stephanie.
yeah, I'd like to comment. I'm a farmer,
Please.
do eggs and meat, and then as
Yeah, you do.
dairy. And so the price of eggs, the price of beef, farmers are at a position where we're finally getting paid for our products.
Which we
And
love.
I know. And what I think the consumer really needs to learn is in the grocery store, there is so much processed food that is sold
Yep.
cheap and sometimes expensive, and people buy it and they buy their lattes and they do their coffee drinks, depending on their, their level of income. But these animal foods that are all of a sudden a higher price because of inflation is also benefiting farmers. And I wish that I like the egg, when the whole egg thing happened almost 2 years ago, where they got really expensive. And I was at a wedding and my cousins are like, oh my gosh, eggs are so expensive. And I'm like, they are the #1 superfood for nutrient density. They can grow a baby chick. They're finally valued at what they're worth. And a lot of these proteins are today. And that's maybe a messaging we as an industry in animal agriculture need to get across. But there is other things that certainly I worry about, inflation too, but food where there are proteins and their nutrient density and can feed the brain and good for health, definitely we need better messaging. And animals do help the soil too if they're done right.
yeah, I think that's a great point. Obviously, prices go up and down. And if you're an agriculture producer or anything else, you need those good years to offset the lean years.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just I'm going to give a really quick plug because Stephanie's actually going to be talking about the nutrient quality of what they produce, and it's incredible. It's so much higher than standard, and how they've actually used that to change their FDA side panel on the Soil and Climate Alliance fall meeting in a few weeks. And I will drop the link for that if anybody wants to dive more into what does that actually look like from a product, and how do we, exactly what Stephanie just said, how do we tell that story about why it's more important and why we want to make sure that our farmers are the ones getting that premium and not the brand slapping a wrapper on those eggs at the grocery store. I have no problem paying you $6 a dozen. I have a problem paying, some random egg company. So thanks for jumping in with that, Stephanie. We always so deeply appreciate farmer perspective because you guys are the ones that we really want to help. So
Thank you. Appreciate that.
any other comments there? Anything else anybody wants to drop into the conversation? I'm going to drop that link for the meeting I just told you about. We'll be talking about Stephanie's amazing work at Alexander Family Farms. We'll also be talking about what's really happening economically for farmers on the ground with all of these uncertainties, with the tariffs that Brian talked about, with the programs that Ben talked about that aren't being paid out, with all of these standstills. So we'll really dive into that, as well as connecting non-processed foods through to health and how we could really be focusing our system on a health outcome. So quick, as the director, I have to drop that into conversation really, really quickly. Brian, thank you for bringing up that Supreme Court the hearing today. I was just getting snippets out of it, but a couple of other judicial updates, just because we're doing a full update on what is going on all levels of the government today, is, for a lot of years, the Supreme Court was fairly balanced. It shifted to be 6-3 with a conservative majority, which has really affected a number of issues that are, while the original cases weren't directly affecting agriculture, what the ramifications of it are. So, the Supreme Court this year cleared the path for the mass reduction of federal government workforce, which has really affected USDA, NRCS, FSA. So that's really rough. 25% of NRCS has been laid off this year, which, with as closely as they work with our farmers, is really heartbreaking. Also a big impact for rural economies. Those were good federal jobs that were, supporting a lot of families in rural places. Some of the lower court rulings that were then overruled by the Supreme Court around non-citizens, I guess is the way they framed it, being deported, which we know has affected farm labor processing, really hurting the industry as migrant laborers are targeted, especially in California. I'm really close to the Central Valley. A lot of folks are afraid to go to work, which means not only is food rotting in fields, but those laborers and their families are not getting paid. And so they're really at risk for a lot of, for hunger and for being homeless and all of these pieces that we don't want to hear. As Brian said, we will be tracking this tariff argument in front of the Supreme Court. I thought maybe because it was a quick one, they'd have to give a timeline on ruling, but according to Google, they don't. So we will just have to keep an eye on that. All right, that was a lot of things that we don't know and are not going super well right now. With that said, I want to share with you a couple of updates on things that RPI is leading, and primarily Erica and Aisha, who are listening. They are en route to another event, so they're on just listening. So ladies, jump in if I get something wrong, but we've shared this with you before, and it on the reintroduction of the Soil Care Act, which was a marker bill in the last Congress, and would love to reintroduce it as a marker bill in this Congress, leading towards a potential farm bill. I am dropping in the sign-on form right now. We've got 6 organizations that have joined us, which is really exciting. And we are working with the team at American Regeneration to try to identify a Republican sponsor to join with Senator Merkley, because this was originally a bipartisan bill and we would like it to be one again, both because agriculture should be bipartisan and because if it's not, then it won't go anywhere. So it makes it really, really rough to introduce. So the sign-on letter is there. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out. We're happy to have conversations. But just as we continue to really think about how we position soil health and supporting soil health in this system and moving forward, we want to make sure that these bills are staying on people's minds. If you happen to talk to any members or any staffers, feel free to mention it to them. If they're bored, maybe they want to do a little research, and we can always share more of that background with you all. The other piece, and I know there's a lot of links in the chat, and these will all come out via email later when I send the follow-ups. But the other piece that we really wanted to draw your attention to, and I think everybody's been hearing this, is just the way that, and we use the term MAHA very loosely because there's a lot of groups representing different parts of it, but really great letter from Farm Action calling on USDA to follow the MAHA recommendations around regenerative agriculture. So it's an area where we all very, very much agree, even though we are not seeing policies put in place or programs to support these. But I just dropped the link to that letter. It's really, really well done. It's really fantastic. And it really got Erica and Aisha and I thinking about it. And I know I've had conversations with Aria and a number of other people on this call about where do we engage with MAHA? Who do we engage with MAHA? What MAHA do we engage with? But really thinking about this, because something that MAHA has been really fabulous about in their very broad sense is getting people to think about what's in their food. And a lot of people are learning more and more about, not only glyphosate, but just processing and chemicals and all of these pieces. And that's good because we know that these changes need to happen. And so what we would like to do on the December call is we can have a few minutes of discussion here, or we can set up one-on-ones, whatever you're most comfortable with. Really talk about what you're seeing, what you're hearing, how it aligns with your work, and then come up with our own RPI position on this to engage more with MAHA moving forward and really leveraging how and where we can to advance this work that we've all been doing for so long. So I would love to hear anything that anybody has to share about their work, how this overlaps. If you have the negative opinion, you're like, don't touch them with a 10-foot pole. Would love to hear that too. Just really, we've got a few minutes to just open it up for conversation in this space.
Hi, Jessica. My name is John Poor. I'm with the Non-GMO Project. It's my
Hey,
first time
John.
hopping on this call. Hello. We have had some contact with MAHA, and I've had a lot of conversations recently with a variety of different organizations. And at least our experience so far has been that a lot of the early leadership of MAHA, the folks who really carried them forward and carried this administration to the White House, hit DC and then kind of found out what DC was all about and have left DC. And so where we've seen a major cleavage is the state versus the federal level. So there's a lot of individuals who have been at the state level for a long time. They do not get along with the folks in DC anymore, and they're kind of fighting. They're having some infighting with the federal level, but they're still very passionate and oriented towards the message. Where on the federal side of things, a lot of the issues that were formerly cared about don't seem to be quite so high priority and more money motivated. And there seems to be a bit more of a mercurial behavior with folks that we've dealt with on that side, to the point that as we're talking to people, they're kind of saying, 10-foot pole on the federal side of things, but you can engage fairly safely on the state level. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that has been our experience, is that it is not monolithic, and that it really, you need to be careful on the federal level because there are some teeth there. And if somebody switches out in the spot and it's their favorite project, they might end up trying to burn your organization.
No, thank you for that, John. That's a much more eloquent way of what I was attempting to say, and also really good to know about the state federal connection. Are there any states where you guys have gotten really strong, really positive, really, from MAHA leaders in the states that, really want to engage more broadly?
I would say so, and this is again mostly feeling out and working with different organizations, and their experiences. But where we have seen some really positive feedback is like Utah. Utah has a really strong presence there.
Yeah.
Very social, very oriented towards learning and digging deeper into this. And then there have been some folks that are like in the farming states. So if you're looking at North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, those areas, I think there are some strong ties between the MAHA nutrition folks and the farming communities, and they're seeing pathways forward to both enhance nutrition and accessibility to good food and the economic circumstances of the individual farmers in those spaces.
Interesting. Yeah, and Utah can move really fast on legislation. We already saw them. They removed fluoride from the water already this year. They did a couple of pieces really early on in 2025. And what's interesting about the Dakotas is those are key states. I think we've talked about this before on other calls. The pesticide liability shields Bayer predominantly is trying to get them through at the state level and the federal level. North Dakota passed it at the state level, but it's a referendum next year, so they could retract that law, repeal that law. So it's interesting to see the overlaps between MAHA and the states that it's really rooting in, and these pesticide liability shields. And mostly it could be a really interesting political fight, which is what I'm sometimes in the game for. So
And
awesome. Other thoughts? Oh, go ahead, John.
No, just a final thought that may be a strong correlation. If anybody's paying attention to the ultra processed foods conversation, We're doing our ultra processed foods verification mark coming out soon, so we're watching a lot of the state regulations take place around the country. And that's going to be Louisiana, that's going to be Arkansas, that's Missouri. We do have stuff in California, there's Massachusetts. Some of those are going to be not MAHA, but a lot of those have
Yeah.
a lot of MAHA influence. So if you're looking for states where you might be able to find good MAHA allies that are still very active, maybe look up where there's regulations taking place around ultra processed foods.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about that, and if we can support that work. Yes, the non UPC verified standard is about to drop. I was on the webinar this morning. It's going to be really exciting if you really like digging into the nitty-gritty of what is in your food. So thanks for that, John. Other thoughts, other areas we should be focusing on or concerning within this broader space? Stephanie.
We got invited to a MAHA event, and I think you guys would know many of the people in the room, Tina Owens,
Yeah.
to speak of and stuff. And it was really neat. It certainly was focused on regenerative agriculture, and that's why we got invited as a regenerative agriculture farmer. And it was great. And my husband made a point that you got the red team doing this MAHA thing, but it really should be the red, white, and blue when it comes to making America healthy again. It's unfortunate that it's becomes political, but I think there's many common values in the health system, the regenerative, organic, all that stuff that we can all agree on. And we're all trying to just bridge that gap and talk through the message. I was listening to Blake, he's on the organic dairy committee for OTA, and they actually had somebody from National Dairy talk at MAHA. So whenever we as dairy farmers talk about healthy things, we don't mention MAHA, we just mention regenerative practices. As he talking, not him from conventional milk, but we talk about the goodness of dairy and the nutrient density. Same when I just talked earlier, that just the goodness of animal proteins and their effect on pasture grazing and utilizing them in some sort of system to build that organic matter, which is regenerative agriculture. So it's part of the we in as whether we're red or blue, it's our messaging to change the food system and not get polarized on a political party that's trying to do it. Because I think we're all trying to do it in our own way. And that was a big point, I thought, with that whole thing. And then Callie Means at the end of the session joined us and took our cliff notes to take them to the MAHA team. And he was on a big Zoom screen the last hour and a half of our meetings. So we all try and serve where we can, and that was an invitation we accepted to be in that group.
Yeah, amazing. And always grateful that you and Blake are in those rooms, because you know what it takes to shift this, and you can bring that real experience to it. So, Paul, I see a hand.
Hi, thank you. Paul Figueroa from the Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance. Very, I echo a lot of the comments that have been made at the Texas state level. We were able to get a regenerative grant program passed in the House, 121 to 12. We gave that bill a very low probability of passing because it was to create, it was to fund the public universities in Texas to create a regenerative ag program, right? So we thought it just had, it had so many elements of it that could be potentially politically polarizing. But it did end up passing in the House overwhelmingly, and the only reason why I didn't pass the Senate is that the calendar ran out of time. The Texas state legislature meets for a very brief amount of time. And then we've been engaging with the MAHA. Texas had a MAHA caucus created at the state legislature. So we have found that it's been, we have been able to move bipartisan bills in Texas with the support of the MAHA caucus.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And yeah, we were lucky enough to be able to work with Judith a little bit last year on that grant bill, and fingers crossed we can bring it back in 27 when the legislature comes back. So, and if there's anything as you're working on that we can do to support, not that Texas needs support from us, but if we can help you guys talk to members, talk to staffers, get them excited about it rolling into 27, please let us know. Let this group know. Again, this group is a wealth of knowledge. You guys have to listen to me talk a lot because I put the agenda together, but you're all out there doing this work just as we all are. So it's great to be able to connect. We've got about 6 minutes. If anybody else has anything they want to drop into the conversation, please do. Otherwise, we can wrap up and I'll share recordings and notes and all of that. If you know somebody who wanted to come and just didn't make it, please feel free to share the recording. This is, again, the more of us that are in line with one another on where we are and what we can do, the better we can move this all forward.
I'll just very quickly throw this link into the chat. Some of you might have seen the news of the former, under the Republican administration, former FDA head who has sort of articulated a strategy naming that he thinks that the FDA would have the authority to name certain ultra-processed foods, to have those changed under the GRAS, the generally recognized as safe rule, or removing ultra-processed foods from that designation, and that could be actually sort of an interesting way of using existing authority to make some advancements on ultra-processed foods, which are totally connected to our work. It's a little bit outside of the space that we normally play in, and I don't know at all the sort of how folks are viewing the politics of this move. But if anyone has any thoughts on it, I think it could be an interesting sort of tactic, and certainly like a specific issue that would connect with MAHA supporters really directly. And it might be something a ball that they can help carry a little further forward if it's of interest.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that. I've seen this. I haven't seen the full article, but I've seen it pop up. And, my curiosity around ultra processed foods and putting any sort of certifications, federal or the one that NGP is dropping or any of the other ones is, could that be another lever that helps us shift money to the farmers growing the whole foods, the quality foods, as opposed to, I mean, I love a Cool Ranch Dorito, but it is not good for me. And I need, 2 bags of them a year. So let's get more of those high quality animal proteins on the market. Especially right now when we know people are struggling with food insecurity. So I think it's all so connected, which is why I love the food space. It touches on so many of these issues. So, Brian. Oh, no.
Just want
Okay.
to say thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And yeah, as Erica and Aisha and I work together on sort of mapping where we fit in this, broader space on building regenerative agriculture, engaging with the MAHA crew, state and federal, we're going to share something with you guys in advance of the December meeting so that you actually have time to review it. And we'll talk about this more, but really, really want to explore this space and how we can engage. So I think it's Wednesday. Have a great Wednesday, everybody. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk soon.